Ray Poynter here, and I'm going to take you through our 2022 trends in CX. So I'm going to start by looking at three of the drivers of change. So when we're looking at the trends, we need to understand what is causing those trends. And we've identified three groups of drivers, and I'll take you through those. Then I'm going to take you through the 7 key trends that we've identified that are going to be really impacting customer experience throughout 2022. And then Mel and I look forward to Q&A with you. So the first of these 3 drivers of change are things that are consumer-led. And of course, over the last couple of years, the biggest thing has been the pandemic. And that has changed all sorts of consumer behavior. So remote purchasing, remote communication, yes, big changes. How much of that online shopping and remote activity will continue going forward is an interesting question. We also saw quite a shift around some of the sustainability, disposable type conversations. There was a big push away from disposable cups and disposable straws and so on. And then during the pandemic, a movement back towards them. All of a sudden, we didn't want to be sharing cups and mugs and plates with other people. We wanted the comfort of them being single use. Presumably that would change, but how quickly and to what extent? We've also seen the rise of what has been called the angry me people. More and more customers behaving unreasonably to other customers, behaving unreasonably to employees. This has been exacerbated by the pandemic, but it was growing before then. And this is a factor that's changing the way CX needs to operate. Then there are company-led changes. For several years, there's been a push to do away with the silos and move to a more holistic view. That is continuing, and it is shaping CX. There has been for several years, and it is continuing, more focus on return on investment. If we're doing something, we need to know that there is a financial return for the organization. And this one kind of links back to the angry me. This is the company reaction to this consumer trend. A shift from outright the customer is right to a balanced view of the employee experience and the customer experience. And this has been driven, as I say, partly by the pandemic, partly by the rise of these angry people, but also by the Great Resignation, the number of people who have changed employment. And it's made life really difficult for many companies to recruit the right staff. And the third change group are all the technology-led changes. We are getting more and better methods of collecting data, which is great. We are looking to integrate data with other systems, so we're not having so many data silos. Once we've integrated that data, we want more data access, more data sharing, more democratization of information. And it seems painfully slow, artificial intelligence, machine learning, but it is progressing. We're seeing more of it coming in every year, and it will continue to shape the trends that happen in CX. So those are the 3 drivers. Now let's go through the 7 trends that we've identified in CX for 2022. The first we're calling beyond measuring. And there's this lovely quote that's usually attributed to Albert Einstein. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. So the history of CX was really all around auditing, compliance, often linking compliance to bonuses. And nobody's going to criticize something for starting, but that is not enough, and it's limiting. The more you link auditing and bonuses together, the less you're going to get real value from your CX program. And what we're seeing now is a trend towards learning the best practices. So shifting from a mindset of what is wrong to what is great and how can we utilize that. And the best organizations are using CX to drive change. They're using it to drive innovation. When something is done differently and it works, that is great. If we were back in the audit mentality, if something is done differently, it's bad. But actually, a real customer experience mentality says innovation that works should be identified, replicated, put into the best experiences for other people. The second trend is integrating CX into wider systems. The context for information is so important. The sorts of wider information systems that we're seeing CX being linked to is better calculation of lifetime value. We know that the lifetime value of a customer is so much greater than the transactional value for the next transaction. So we need to link those together. We need to identify different methods and styles of usage and link the usage data back to the CX information. We need to monitor social media alongside our CX information, and we need to integrate insights. In too many cases, we see different teams in a company being responsible for insights and being responsible for the customer experience program. But the trend is towards linking those together so we get this holistic picture built on wider systems. The third trend builds on that a lot. It's a very specific way of linking the CX information to other information sets. Because what we have identified and what lots of our customers have identified is that depth without breadth is dangerous. You do a deep dive qualitative study and it tells you something about one type of customer in one situation. Breadth without depth is limiting, and a classic CX program was breadth. It asked a few questions to lots of people, but it didn't really facilitate understanding why or generating change. And the sorts of T-shaped programs we're seeing in the CX area are, first of all, linking the CX program and online communities, something we've been doing now for 2 or 3 years, and we're seeing lots of other organizations beginning to promote this as well, which is fantastic. Linking CX programs with smartphone videos, getting people to act as reporters for us, showing us what they mean. I got home and this is what my shopping bag looked like after it was packed. I got back from holiday and this is what we discovered. I was on holiday and this is what we were confronted with. Really bringing the information to life. And also linking CX programs to agile qual. Something goes wrong, let's immediately dive into understanding what is going wrong and how we could fix it. Because we don't want to try to fix it until we understand what's going wrong and until we understand the best way of fixing it, but we don't want to wait a long time before we fix it. That is why we want this agile qual, which often works very nicely with the CX program and the community, because that is going to give us the people that we can work with. The fourth trend really is the rise of the Chief Experience Officer. And if we go back to Pine and Gilmore's book about the experience economy, we see that capitalism, the worldwide system, first we had commodities, then we had goods, then we had services, and now we're in the experience economy world. And that is why these chief experience officers are so important. They are bringing the customer to the board. That is one of the key things they do. But the best trends are where the chief experience officer is responsible for EX, the experience of the employees, UX, the user experience, and CX, the customer experience. We want all three of those experiences to be reporting back through the same channel so that we're seeing what's going on, so we're understanding what's going on, and that the experience is really impacting board level decisions, strategic decisions, as well as tactical decisions. The fifth trend comes back to this point I've mentioned before. Is the customer always right? And of course, there are always some people that are earlier to the game than others. And this is a quote here from Seth Godin. If the customer is wrong, they're not your customer anymore. We can't make everybody happy. Some people aren't going to be happy. We need to make sure we are balancing the right thing for our customers and the right thing for our employees. And if you start to have a look around, you will find more and more cases of the angry customer. The customer who would rather see the aeroplane turned back than wear a mask along with everybody else. And this challenge about the customer being right must not be taken too far. The customer is nearly always right, absolutely. But we need to balance that with the customer experience program and the employee experience program. The sixth is about playing the long game. I talked earlier about lifetime value. A relationship is not a series of first dates. If you're on a first date, you might try to be very impressive and showy, but it's not sustainable. What we're looking for are sustainable relationships with customers and with employees. And that means collecting data over time. If you do look at customer data, for example, over time, you will find most customers have been delighted at some point and they have been unhappy at some point. Unhappy customers don't automatically leave. Happy customers don't automatically stay. It's a more complicated picture. And you will pick that up with longitudinal tools that allow you to look at these changes and measure things like promises and delivery against those promises. And the seventh point is the key point that brings all of this together, this shift that we're seeing towards HX, human experiences. Doesn't matter whether it's UX, EX, CX, at the end of the day, it has to be a human experience. As Simon Sinek said, 100% of customers are people. 100% of employees are people. If you don't understand people, you don't understand business. So what we are seeing is programs becoming more humanized. So there is more voice. We're seeing senior managers ringing up people who've done the CX survey to say, thank you for doing the survey. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? We are seeing surveys being crafted so they build on previous experiences. They don't ask them, did you fly with us today? They talk about what you actually did and can we have some more information? And they provide more feedback to people. They understand that people don't rotate around brands. Our brands and services rotate around the people. We're useful some of the time, but not all of the time. We need to identify when people need us and what we can do to help them in those situations. So in summary, the big trends you are going to see in 2022, the movement beyond just measuring. We're seeing CX being integrated into wider systems, not part of the silo. We're seeing T-shaped insights being used to integrate CX with the interpretation of why and why not and what if. The rise of chief experience officers. If your organization doesn't have a chief experience officer, it needs one. And that chief experience officer should be in charge of CX and employee experience and user experience, culminating in HX, the human experience. You need to get the balance right of, is the customer always right? The answer is usually, but not always. We need to play the long game. You need to be using longitudinal tools that allow you to measure the relationship on a one-to-one basis with customers and users and employees. And all of this needs to be done in the context of humanizing CX.